Hi Mudders, and welcome to the second in our multi-part video series on stress. My name is Catherine Tabakian, and I'm the Graduate Assistant for the Office of Health and Wellness here at Harvey Mudd College. These videos are made as part of an ongoing collaboration between the Office of Health and Wellness and the Office of Academic Resources and Student Success. In our last video, we introduced a basic definition of stress. You may recall that stress is defined as any external stimulus that disrupts our body's natural tendency towards balance, or homeostasis. We also discussed some of the most commonly recognized sources of stress and reviewed the most common physical and emotional symptoms associated with being stressed. In this video, we will be moving on to talk more about the biology of stress. As you may have guessed, stress begins in the brain, more specifically the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is a relatively tiny section of the forebrain that is primarily responsible for maintaining homeostasis. It accomplishes this by bridging interactions between the nervous system, which coordinates muscle movement and sensory information, and the endocrine system, which regulates the release of hormones. The hypothalamus indirectly controls a lot of the body's most crucial metabolic processes by regulating heart rate and blood pressure, overall body temperature, fluid and electrolyte balance, appetite, thirst, and digestion, sleep cycles, and some other noteworthy emotions and behaviors. In stressful situations, the hypothalamus of the brain encourages the release of hormones, including adrenaline, and activates the sympathetic nervous system, the same part of your brain responsible for triggering the well-known fight or flight response. From an evolutionary standpoint, the fight or flight response is a survival mechanism meant to prime the body to respond to physical threat, the most common example being confrontation with a dangerous predator. When this response is triggered, the individual must decide between fighting the attacker head-on or fleeing the scene in search of safety. When in fight or flight mode, the body prepares itself to take in as much information as possible to encourage quick decision-making and even quicker action. As I mentioned before, the fight or flight response activates the sympathetic nervous system. When this system is triggered, blood moves from the surface of the body to better prioritize increased flow to the arms, legs, heart, and brain. This leads to uncharacteristically pale or flushed skin due to changes in blood flow, rapid increases in heart rate and breathing as the body uses up more oxygen and fuel to encourage quick decision-making, dilated pupils, which allow more light to enter the eyes and provides better vision of one's surroundings, and jitters or tremors as the muscles tense up and prepare for action. Any of this sound familiar? A lot of the physical symptoms of fight or flight activation are the very same symptoms we typically associate with being stressed. That's because they're both controlled by the same system and the same parts of the brain. In fact, you may not be surprised to learn that the fight or flight response is also known as the acute stress response. It may seem weird to equate stress from exams or homework to stress from a tangible physical threat. But to the brain, it's all the same, which is why it's all the more important to understand why we react to it in the way we do. In 1936, a doctor by the name of Hans Selye developed a model known as general adaptation syndrome, which breaks down the stress response into 3 distinct phases. The first phase in this model is alarm, or the fight or flight response. In this phase, the body mobilizes as a potential stressor is identified, and the sympathetic nervous system is prompted into action as the body begins to exhibit many of the aforementioned physical symptoms. The second phase in this model is adaptation, or resistance, as the body shifts towards coping with and adapting to the threat if it continues to persist. The third phase in the general adaptation syndrome has 2 possibilities: recovery or exhaustion. The best case scenario is the recovery phase, where the stressor is successfully overcome and homeostasis is restored as the body returns to its baseline status. However, if the body fails to overcome the threat in question, or its resources are completely depleted, it reaches the phase known as exhaustion. The body may stay in a prolonged state of fight or flight activation, disrupting or impacting bodily functions and potentially leading to adverse long-term health outcomes. This is the point at which stress begins to compromise our own well-being. This graph traces the distinct phases of general adaptation syndrome by plotting the body's resistance to stress against time. As you can see, the graph begins at the body's baseline state, homeostasis. When a stressful stimulus is encountered, the the body shifts into fight or flight as it quickly builds up a resistance to the stressor. Tracing this line further, we reach phase 2, resistance, as the body tries to cope and reaches a peak in its ability to deal with a stressful event. Finally, the line begins to lower as resources are depleted and the body and the individual reach the exhaustion phase. Alternately, if the stressor in question is successfully overcome, this graph would plateau back to the same baseline level as before, reaching the recovery phase. The main points to take away from this video is that our stress response is a natural part of maintaining the body's delicate internal balance known as homeostasis. Not all stress is necessarily a bad thing, since our body's response to it is an essential survival tool. The body's stress response evolved to what it is to help us deal and cope with complex and potentially overwhelming problems, but that same response can also compromise our health if left unchecked and uncontrolled. In the next video in this series, we will be learning about what some of these adverse health effects are and what we can do to better cope with stressful situations when they arise. Until then, thank you for watching.